but looking forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks. We're doing this program, this background information program for all the participants in the July program. So we've got a high school program in 2 weeks. Several folks have signed up for, and then we've also got the AITC program at the end of the month. So we do one session for both. So there'll be some names here that and faces you'll meet, and other ones that will be in a different session. So, but we're also recording this, and we'll be able to send this along to everybody. So in case you all need to sign up early or something comes up, you can catch the rest of the program. So. But what I wanted to do, what we also do with these intro sessions is, first, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. What we do with these intro sessions is it's also a chance just to check in and see if anybody has any questions. So about getting here. Hey, Everett, good to see you there. Everett's my nephew. He's going to be coming in 2 weeks. Sorry to pull you out of this, Everett. But if you have any questions about how to get to Montpelier, we always do a dinner on Sunday night to welcome everybody and get everybody settled in after a long day of traveling, and then give you the directions on where we're going to be starting on Monday morning. So, but did everybody get the information on the program and been corresponding with Melissa? Awesome. And if there's any, after this program, I'm going to send out some of the maps that we're using in this talk this afternoon. And then also some of the papers that we might discuss that might not have been sent out. And of course, if there's any information you're interested in, please don't hesitate to write either Melissa or myself, and we can send additional information. But really excited to have you all here in Virginia. It's today is just, I don't know what it's like where you all are at, but it's we got a smoky day here in Virginia, and this is actually the last 2 days of our month-long field school. So we've had college students here for over 5 weeks now, learning about archaeology, taking it for a college credit for a class. And actually 5 of the folks that are on the field school are going to be staying on as interns. So you all will be able to meet them in a unit. They're going to be your unit supervisors during the excavation. So, but yeah, well, one of the things that we try to present and really get people to understand is, of course, the history of Montpelier, but also the history of the landscape. And for the archaeology site, we're working on the overseer's site. It's tied into, and I don't know if you all have had a chance to look at some of the readings that were sent about the home farm, and there's the overseers. Did you all see the overseers story map? It's a overview of the overseers site. Lauren, I see you're nodding your head yes. Okay, you did? Okay, awesome. So, but all these sites in Montpelier are tied together. And when you get to Montpelier, you'll see that, basically what was left at Montpelier in terms of, the early 19th century past, the period of enslavement, was the main house and the temple. And all the other buildings were pulled down or fell down by the mid-19th century, by the Civil War. So we're using archaeology to find all of these structures and really reconstruct what the plantation looks like. So what visitors see today, a lot of the buildings that are out there are buildings that we found through the archaeology and we've reconstructed. And this is really what gets into, the theme of this lecture, which is power of place, which is the power that this place has over, telling the stories that we're talking about with the founding of the country, the period of enslavement. And what I always like to start out with is what does power of place mean for you all? What comes to mind? And there's no right or wrong answer in this, but it's always fun to hear what people say and what that brings to mind. Has anybody heard of power replace? As a term?
Yes, I have.
What does it bring to mind for you, Lauren?
I didn't want to answer, but I
Oh
did.
no, there's no wrong answer. It's
I don't know. Power place is just the importance of a place you travel to, whether it's personal significance or historical significance.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right on. And for so many people that come to Montpelier, as visitors, they're coming in many ways on a personal journey, in some cases as a family vacation, and they're wanting to learn about history. Others are coming to Montpelier, like you all, to learn about archaeology. So that's part of the power. And for others, like the descendant community, they're coming to Montpelier because it's their ancestral home and they want to learn about it. And so for them, the power of place is very different. When you're thinking about a member of the descendant community whose ancestors were enslaved here, and what power this holds, especially with some of the work we're doing right now on the Montpelier burial ground, which is the ancestral burial ground of the enslaved community. And there's a lot of powerful emotions that are being evoked by what we're doing there. But what else comes to mind with all this? And those of you with your camera off, feel free to you can answer to Everett and Natalie and Ellie. Your name is Ellie, right?
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
Ellie as well. So, what does power replace mean? What comes to mind?
Just kind of, to me, it's the place, like, as when we look at historical preservation and what landmarks are considered historical by some versus others, and you kind of see like a narrative of what we deem to be, or what the society deems to be historical and worth preserving. And especially in America with the United States, with United States history, and seeing how certain communities, their sites are left out of the historical landscape, of the official historical landscape, I should say. And
Yeah, and in a lot of cases they're left out because they're the homes and the buildings that are associated with their history are gone. Like with at a plantation, what part of the landscape would that be?
I think that also, just as when it comes to the archaeology of a plantation and studying it, the association of, like, let's say, like, the enslaved person's quarters, viewing it as just this is where they lived, and kind of viewing it through that lens of just, they were enslaved, but not seeing necessarily the ways that enslaved African Americans persevered and resisted their dehumanization on behalf of white oppressors.
Yeah, and if the homes, they're the physical homes and living spaces of African Americans are not there, it makes it really hard to tell that story and to have visitors begin to think about what you're talking about, Ellie, which is persevering through an incredibly what must have been a situation that was so stressful that's inconceivable in our minds. And once those homes are put back on the landscape and done, accurately based on the archaeology, then that story becomes more accessible. And that's why we do what we do, which is using the archaeology to figure out where these spaces are, and then use this information to reconstruct. And when you all are here for the week, we're going to talk about how we represent this history in many different ways, because of course there's different ways to reconstruct the buildings. You can physically reconstruct them detail by detail, with all the clapboards and the siding. You can ghost them and do timber frame outlines like we've done with some, or you can do 3D representations of them. So this is something that we're going to be looking at and talking about throughout the week. So with that, one of one of the things that's important with this is to understand, the time periods that Montpelier went through, and what we've been able to discover about those time periods through the archaeology. And did you all have a chance to look at the PDF, a little booklet called Archaeology at Montpelier that has the different time periods? So awesome. And when you arrive at Montpelier, we'll give you a physical version of that book, but looking at the PDF, it provides some background, and definitely you all are going to have the chance when you're here, in the evenings, with it, being summertime and it doesn't get dark till 8:30, to explore some of these spaces on your own. We're going to bring you through a lot of these spaces on tours, but there's a lot of areas you're going to want to go back and visit, and you'll have the opportunity. And we're hoping that with the readings, you'll be able to have a chance to be able to look at some of these and get excited about what you're gonna be seeing. So what I'll do is I'm gonna share my screen, and we'll start to go into some of this landscape that you're going to be seeing. So I'm gonna share and hide. There we go. And can you all see the map now? You can, the map right here? Okay, awesome. Yeah, this is an overall map of Montpelier. So Montpelier consists of about 2,650 acres. And so, this is about 2 miles across by about a mile deep. And so we've got a lot of land that makes up Montpelier. And where Montpelier is, I'm not sure if you've looked where you're going on the map yet, or charted out your course. I'm sure you have. This is a terrible map to be able to see where things are, but here's this is a GIS map of North America. You can kind of make out Virginia in this area right here. But for those of you that are from the area of Virginia, here's Richmond, Fredericksburg, Charlottesville with Monticello is over in this area. And what this is this what's called the ARC, which is the Arc of communities that make up the Montpelier Descendant Committee and the organization that we're part of as Montpelier. So it's this group of descendant communities that I'll talk about in a second. But for Montpelier, when you look at the 2,700 acres, really, when you come down Route 20 and you turn into the front gatehouse right here and come down the road towards the main house, what most visitors experience is a very limited part of Montpelier. They go, they stop at the visitor center right here, where they get their tickets. They go to the main house for a tour. They might get over to the temple, which is over on the north east corner of the property. And then for some folks that are feeling adventurous, they might get down to the Madison Family Cemetery. And where we're going to be working over the next week is an area of the overseer's house. So here's the visitor center right here. The main house is up in this area. And then this is the excavation site that we're working on right now, which is the 1820s location of the overseer's site at Montpelier. And then all this area is the home farm, which is where there's over a dozen buildings that made up the main farm complex at Montpelier. And so when you look at Montpelier though as a whole, you've got a site, with the 2,700 acres that has a lot of different resources. You've got all of this area that looks like it's in woods. That's all woods. About 2/3 of the property is wooded and 1/3 is open fields. And what we found through survey is that most of these areas have been untouched and unplowed since emancipation. So we've got an incredibly well-preserved set of sites all across the property. And for you all are going to be able to explore everything from the historic core to we'll be bringing you out to the Gilmore Farm, which is an early 19th century freedman's home that we've done a lot of archaeological research on the north side of the property. and then over to some of the Civil War encampments that are out in the area of the Northwoods. And these are, these Confederate encampments that are part of the Civil War history at Montpelier. And you might have seen a little bit of information on these. These are all encampments that were occupied during the winter of 1863 and 1864 between Gettysburg and Wilderness. But there's a lot of landscape that visitors don't have access to. And if you all are interested in exploring any of these wooded areas, we've got trails. All these white lines are trails that go back into the woods and go into what's called the landmark forest in this area. And then we've got another section called the East Woods that is not open to the public, but these are trails that go back to an area that we found, which is another farm complex from the Madison era that by the time of the Civil War was abandoned and then returned, became woodland again. So all this area in here, what we've got is evidence for all kinds of buildings and sites in this area, everything from, threshing barns to, and sometimes with the yellow, it is so hard to see these sites, to tobacco barns that we found back in here. And if you've got, a wooded area and you've got a tobacco barn and a threshing barn, what do you think it means about those wooded areas? What were they when those barns were being used in the 1820s? So like if you get a tobacco barn and a threshing barn for wheat, what does it mean? What was in those areas? Where do you harvest wheat from?
Farms, fields.
Fields and farms. Yeah, exactly. And so all these wooded areas have, 150, 160 years ago were open fields. So we've had a lot of changes on the property and, to make it into what it is today. And that's some of what, we're trying to rectify this in the historic core with the restoration work that we're doing. And this includes everything from, the South Yard that, this picture right here is not a model. This is actually the South Yard with the reconstructed outbuildings in this area. And what this looked like, several years ago, or about a decade ago, was open grassed lawns. So you go from, what you see today to what this used to look like, which was an open lawn, and there actually used to be trees in this area. So there's a variety of contexts that we're going to be looking at. And for the most part, what we're doing at Montpelier is restoring the house and grounds to its early 19th century appearance. So this is, this image right here is what the area around the main house looked like in the 1820s, based on archaeological survey and period paintings. So a lot of the images we'll be showing in the next hour are these 3D reconstructions that are done in what's called 3ds Max, which is a 3D AutoCAD software. And what we've also done is we've incorporated these into models in GIS that you can explore on your own. In fact, we've got we just have redone a set of 3D models of the landscape, and I'll send you the links for those. And we'll, in addition to actually, exploring these sites in the landscape, we're going to do some lectures that talk about some of the virtual reconstructions that we've done, where we can actually show what these sites look like, and you can drill in with information. And by the way, this map that I've got right here, this is a GIS map. So what you're looking at with this is our GIS set of data that, when you click on any of these buildings, everything from the main house to these buildings in the South Yard, there's all kinds of information attached to it. Images on the building. So if you click on this one, there's a whole set of Google images of research that was done on in this case, tobacco barns that we've incorporated into these. So you can really, I'll send you the link to this map. You can really begin to drill into some of the information we've got here at Montpelier. And how many of y'all are familiar with GIS? Anybody know what GIS is? What's GIS, Lauren?
I'm muted, sorry. At least from what I understand from my fiance, it's some computer software where you can remodel historic or any building that didn't exist as like a virtual walkthrough.
Yeah, and that's that. Yeah, that we've done a lot of that with the sites on the property. It's essentially it's a map with data attached to it. So like when you use Google Maps, where you go onto Google Maps and you want to look at a restaurant and you zoom into it, click on it, and all the information on the menu comes up, the menu photos of it, that's GIS. It's information that's tied geographically to a map. So with this, I'll send you the link to this, but this has, again, all kinds of information embedded in it. And as you zoom in, you get all kinds of other information. For example, all the units that we've excavated, and even in many cases, the features that photographs of the features that we have done. And in some cases, the photos are there. Let's see, if we click over here. Yeah, so in this case, for this feature, you've got the chimney base right here. So, but what I want to do now is I'm going to flip my light back on here. Yeah, is what we've got on this map is I want to go over some of the history of the landscape, because at Montpelier, what we've got is, Montpelier was first the land was patented by the Madison family in the 1720s. And then there are three generations of Madison ownership. And then the property was sold in 1844 and goes through about five different owners. And of course, during the Madison period, there were over 350 people enslaved at Montpelier. At its peak, there were about 120 enslaved individuals at one time at Montpelier. And Montpelier consisted of about 5,000 acres. So if you look at the property right here, with the brown being the area that's owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, if you looked at the property lines of Montpelier, say in the 18 teens, it was this gray area around here. So what we've got of the property today incorporates about 3 different plantations. You've got what's called Tetley Plantation up in this area, owned by the Smith family. On this area, what you've got is the Bloomfield, which is the Newman family plantation. And actually, the house that some of y'all are going to be staying at, Arlington House, was originally built by enslaved individuals of the Newmans. And this was the main house for one of the Newman family that divided off Arlington in the 1840s. And then, of course, the core of the property is the Madison property. And what's great about what we have today is we've got the core of the Madison plantation. And the property that's made up of in this area in brown, this was lands that the DuPont family accumulated beginning in 1901. So the DuPonts buy the property in 1901, and by 1920, they've gotten pretty much all of the Madison held lands back in their possession. And then when the second generation DuPonts under Marion DuPont Scott gave Montpelier to the National Trust in 1984, they gave a section of that land. Marion DuPont Scott went through a couple of divorces and gave her previous husband some of the land from her parents' earlier land acquisitions. So, and actually, she gave a lot of land also to former workers of hers as well. So all kinds of interesting history. But some of the earliest history at Montpelier is right in the area where we're going to be working. So here's the visitor center right here, and then the Madison Family Cemetery is here. And what's right beside the Madison Family Cemetery is a site called the Mount Pleasant site. And the Mount Pleasant site is the original family home of the Madison family. And it was for the majority of its history from 1732 through 1761, the matriarch was Frances Madison. This is the grandmother of President Madison, and she becomes a widow in 1732. This is when her husband Ambrose Madison is poisoned by two of the slaves living at Montpelier and a neighboring slave, and he's buried in the Madison family cemetery. But then she remains as a widow up until her death in 1761, and she runs Montpelier as a tobacco farm. And during this time, tobacco horticulture was didn't involve plowing. It would the trees would be girdled, and then the soil would be hoed into hills and the tobacco planted. And this was pretty much the operations for Montpelier up until her death in 1761. But in the meantime, her eldest son, James Madison Sr., and can you all hear me all right with the noise behind me? Okay, because I've got an air conditioner that's in my office here that's quite loud. She really maintains the economic control of the plantation up until 1761. And at that time, her eldest son was about 40 years old. So he marries Nellie Conway Madison in 1761. And when they're married in 1761, that was originally, it was thought that they lived down at the Mount Pleasant complex. But what we found through archaeology is that's when the planter's cottage, this area that's called the kitchen today, was built. And this was built as their basically their cottage that they live in for the first 15 years of their marriage, and have over 7 children in this 16 by 20 structure, and of course would have had enslaved individuals living there as well. And what's interesting is that the main house at Montpelier, which the historic core, this is what Montpelier looks like around 1765. Here's the planter's cottage right here, where James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison, these are the parents of the president, spend the first 15 years of their marriage. This main house doesn't get built, like the timbers aren't cut for this until after 1765, and the bricks, or 1763, and the bricks aren't started to be fired for this until 1762. So basically, they're waiting for Frances Madison, his mother, to die, and she's maintaining the family seat all the way down at Mount Pleasant. So it's this interesting story of, when by the time this main house is built, President Madison is around 14 years old. And so he would have had strong memories of Montpelier when, his parents were living, he and his family were living in the smaller structure, and his grandmother was maintaining the family seat down at Mount Pleasant. So, the early history of Montpelier is a story of Frances, a matriarch, who really forms the economic base of the plantation. And because she's marketing tobacco under her own name up until her death in 1761, this means that James Madison Sr., instead of, when he starts, developing the economic infrastructure for his part of Montpelier, he's not doing any kind of agriculture. He's engaged in being a merchant factor. He's got a store at Montpelier where he imports items from Europe, from England, and sells them to the local community. There's evidence that we found for a massive blacksmith shop up at the main house that begins in the 1750s, where there's about a 2-acre blacksmith shop that was around up until the American Revolution. And really, it's this diversification of the plantation that results in Montpelier being such an incredibly wealthy estate. And when James Madison is beginning his political career in the 1770s and 1780s, it's because of his parents, grandparents, and the enslaved community that he's able to, not have to, worry about any of the economics of the plantation. And so this early history of tobacco farming, blacksmithing, and jobbing out of skilled enslaved people really is part of the history of all of Montpelier. And this is what we're able to explore through the archaeology. So for the 18th century appearance of the house, we'll go over some of this when you all are here. But the 18th century appearance of the house with these buildings out in front of the house, and this a section of the main house that was built by 1765. This is pretty much from 1765 into the 1790s what Montpelier looks like. And so when we talk about Madison's history of writing the Virginia plan, this is the structure and the home he would have known when he came back in the summer of 1787 to write the Virginia plan. And what we know of Montpelier today in terms of the work we've done in restoring it back to its early 19th century appearance, all the wings on the house and this federal era picturesque landscape, this isn't established until the 18 teens, when James and Dolly Madison are in the White House and they're preparing for retirement. And by the time you get to the 18 teens, James Madison's father has passed away, and his mother is living in a section of the house. But what James and Dolly arranged for is a radical transformation of this Georgian landscape, that you have right here with these flanking outbuildings, which is a bit like Stratford Hall and other plantations in Virginia, to this much more picturesque landscape that, these buildings that are out front are torn down. A pine alley is planted, a grove of trees is planted over here, and all the buildings are transferred into the South Yard, where we've done a lot of excavations over the past decade. So, but what we've found in the archaeology is this 18th century landscape is preserved under this early 19th century landscaping. So you've got this layer cake of archaeology. So for example, when we were looking for the pine trees in the area between, let me show you this picture right here, in the area between the let's see, the portico and the temple, there was evidence from documentary records of about 20 pine trees being planted in this area. And when we did excavations of these pine tree holes closer to the temple, what we found is evidence for the blacksmithing shop that was in this area. But then when we get closer up to the main house and we're discovering some of these pine tree holes, what we're also discovered was evidence for these buildings, these flanking buildings that used to be in front of the house, but then they were cut through by these planting holes from the pine alley. So you've got this complex interplay between 18th and early 19th century archaeology that just makes the archaeological record just incredibly rich. And what we've done at Montpelier is what we've done at Montpelier is while we've focused on looking at this early 19th century appearance of the landscape, what we're constantly encountering is 18th century features, 18th century artifacts that we're incorporating into our studies. So for example, when you're at the overseer's house this month, what y'all are going to be finding is, for the most part, 19th century artifacts dating to the 1820s, but there's a whole mix of 18th century artifacts that date back to the early Mount Pleasant site. So the site here, being so long lived, there's a lot of complexity to it. And so understanding, the changes through time is incredibly important. So some of the areas that we've done work on as well, in addition to the formal grounds around the main house, is excavations in the area of the South Yard. So this is a shot of what we call the South Yard, which is the working areas and the living areas for the enslaved individuals that worked in the main house. What we've got is about 6 buildings we found through the archaeology. And this is a shot of excavations that we did in 2011 these duplex structures. And with the archaeology that we've done, what we've done is actually reconstructed these buildings based on the archaeology. So you've got everything from, these foundations of buildings right here, or the central chimney right here. Those were used to figure out what this space looked like to reconstruct these buildings. And then you've got, also the smoke houses that we discovered with the trenches for the wooden foundations that these buildings were built in, along with the fire pits. Those were used for figuring out, reconstructing the smoke houses in this area. And then finally, you've got the kitchen, which is this much earlier structure dating from the 1750s that is built in the 1750s as a planter's cottage before the main house is built, but then it's used as a kitchen all the way up until 1829, when after Nellie Conway Madison passes away, that structure is abandoned and it collapses in place. But for example, in the South Yard, some of the work we've done in this area, what we've been able to figure out is all of this South Yard with all the buildings that we've reconstructed today. These buildings were in place up until the 1840s. And then when Dolly sells the property in 1844, these buildings are essentially abandoned, no longer used. And by 1848, the next owner has taken them down, torn them down. And what you've got is, basically this turns into a part of the formal landscape, the green landscape that accompanies the main house. So what we've done at Montpelier has gone from the archaeology to actually reconstructing these areas so we can tell this much fuller story. And what's really been inspired us to do much of this work has been work we've done with the descendant community. So in the case of the South Yard, the work that we've done when we first started doing work in the South Yard, this is some of the first work we did in an intensive way with descendants. And in working with the descendants, especially in the South Yard, some of the questions that came from that in getting descendants to be part of what the research process is they had an intense interest in what we were going to do with the information from their ancestors' sites. And what was really amazing, and you all are going to be part of this as well, is when you're touching an artifact that's uncovered in one of these units, you're going to be the first person to have touched that in over 200 years. And so for descendants, holding an object in their hand that hadn't been touched by anyone else except for potentially one of their ancestors 200 years ago, this is almost a spiritual journey for them, and a very tangible way to make connection with the past. And so this, as you all will experience over when you're here for the week, is we have a lot of discussions at the site and when we're doing tours. And one of the questions they had about the work we were doing in the South Yard with the discoveries we were making is, once we rebuilt these buildings based on the archaeology, how this information was going to be presented to the public. And when you go through the main house, and we'll talk about this when we go through the exhibit called Mere Distinction of Color, when you go through most main house tours, you're told to put away the camera, don't bring any drinks in. But then when you go out to areas of the homes of the enslaved, they're more usually self-guided tours. And what the descendants asked was how we were going to maintain the same level of reverence and respect for their ancestors' homes that occurred in the main house. And so this is where we co-designed with the descendants community the exhibit called The Mere Distinction of Color, that looks at the intersection between race, slavery, and the Constitution. And the Constitution being that very important document that we interpret here at Montpelier, because part of it was written here at Montpelier. And how did Madison write that? He wrote it as an enslaver, and he was able to pursue his political career and his political philosophy from the wealth that was generated by people who he denied the same liberties he was writing about when he was working on the Virginia Plan and the Bill of Rights. So all this story is one that it's informed by the archaeology, but also has been really informed by conversations we've had with descendants, and also through the years with conversations that we've had with folks just like you that have come on these digs. And so when you all are working on the property, you're going to be part of a much larger story. It's going to be a personal journey for you all in terms of discovering the past and seeing how we do it through the archaeology. But it's also going to be part of what we're doing to really reconstruct what Montpelier was, and then what sites are next on the horizon for interpretation. And so we spent, and again, this is, with this map of Montpelier, the area that we've focused the past 30 years on is this area, which is about a half a mile in diameter. And the past 10, 15 years is focused on the main house in the south yard. But what we've done over the past 5 years is really begin to look at what is below the visitor center in the fields, which is the home farm. And this is an area that encompasses about 60 acres and was this site of all kinds of work buildings that we found and homes of enslaved that we found through archaeology. So if you look at the this image right here side by side, you can see in this one, here's the visitor center. The overseer's house, where we're going to be doing excavations, is over in this area. And then in this map, which is a 3D reconstruction of what this area looks like, the present day visitor center was a paddock for draft animals. And then where the fields are today, this was all this farm complex with the homes for skilled artisans in this area, the overseer's house, the blacksmith shop, sheds, tobacco barns, a tobacco barn and a stable, a threshing barn complex up in this area. It was basically this industrial village that was the center of all of the agricultural operations in the 1820s. And how we found so much of this site has been through metal detector surveys. And with the metal detector surveys, what we do is we basically sweep areas of Montpelier with a metal detector, but do it in a grid. And the first level of survey is using a 20-meter grid, which is about 1/10 of an acre. And then if you look at the property here, what you can see in this map, this grid that's showing up right here across the property, this is areas that we've done metal detector sweeps on a 20-meter grid. And this symbology here, this color coding, denotes what the concentration of artifacts are. And before I get into this, if we're using a metal detector survey to try to find buildings, what do you think we're going to find of buildings that you'd be able to locate with a metal detector?
Nails, door hinges.
Yeah, all these iron objects. And this is what for metal detectorists that come to Montpelier, we work with a lot of metal detector hobbyists. When they come to Montpelier, they're initially excited that they're going to be finding buttons and buckles and coins. And then when we tell them that no, 99.9% of what you're going to be finding is nails, they have this collective moan, because it's usually nails are what they're throwing away if they're doing metal detecting. But what we talk to them about is that actually with nails, not only can you find the buildings, but also you can date a site with nails, because from the 1760s through the 1840s, nails go through about 4 different manufacturer changes. And with how well preserved these nails are in the ground, you can actually date the nails to these periods. And with that, you can actually associate the buildings with what generation of Madison ownership this occurred in. So we're able to link buildings, for example, that we're finding out here in the farm complex where all these red concentrations are. This is where we've located buildings. We're able to link these buildings based on the nails to the historic changes of the main house. And we're able to tie what we're finding in the farm complex to, the history of the Madison family, the history of the enslaved community. And one thing about all this area is we have hardly any maps that show where any of these buildings are. In fact, we've got exactly 2 maps of Montpelier, one of which, the largest map we have, is a 1844 plat that shows 3 buildings. You've got the Montpelier dwelling house, the main house here. You've got the overseer's house, the site we're working on, and then you've got the Madison Mill down the hill. And when you look at the landscape here, let me turn off all this, the color of all the metal detector survey. Here's the main house right here. So here's the main house that's shown right here on the map. The mill is down in this area right here. So this is the Madison era mill that shows up down here, Madison's Mill. And then somewhere in between the mill and the main house is the overseer's house. And how we've located the overseer's house is this site right here. We located through, initially through the 20-meter metal detector survey. And the problem with the 20-meter metal detector survey is when you look at these concentrations of artifacts, you can see, basically where there's intensive occupation. The areas in green are these lower concentrations, and these are probably fields. And then when you get into the red and the oranges, this is where the buildings are, because you have, like you were saying, Lauren, this is where concentrations of nails are. But to really differentiate these sites, what we need to do is go to, instead of doing metal detector survey on a 20-meter interval, we take it down to a 10-foot interval, and all of a sudden your resolution becomes good enough where you can start picking out sites within these larger concentrations. So for example, in the area of the overseers, the blacksmith, and the Mount Pleasant site, there in the 20-meter survey, there was just this giant blob that shows up here. But when you do it on a 10-foot interval, the blacksmith shop differentiates itself. And we literally found the location of the blacksmith through, doing the metal detector survey and then opening up units. So all these little squares right here, these squares are 10-foot squares from the metal detector survey. And then these smaller squares are these squares from our excavation unit. For example, this square right here is this 5x5 unit where we actually located what we think is the base of the forge for the blacksmith shop. And we found all in this unit, we found literally this is what we found in a single unit. Hundreds of fragments of clipped iron, all this slag, and in this iron, there's everything from horseshoe nails to repaired tools, evidence of a very busy blacksmith shop. And all this, these units are just loaded with all this blacksmith material here. And then up in this area where we've got this concentration of artifacts, this is where we began to find very different features that instead of finding slag and blacksmith material, we started finding ceramics, glass, and domestic materials. So in this site, what we're locating is, evidence for the what we think is the overseer's house. And one of the main features that we found here that really speaks to that is this well that we located, that was located in the 1980s because it was subsiding. But then also what we found is a concentration of brick in this area. And then we began to find all these subfloor pits. So this image right here is a picture of a subfloor pit. And it's probably a little bit hard to see this, but this outline right here, this is a drawing of this unit right here. And can you all see the difference between this brown stain right here and the subsoil right here. This is one of these features that we're going to be excavating this season. So with the field school, what we're doing is we've opened up a whole bunch of units all in this area. So we've all these squares that are empty. These are squares that we've opened up this past month with this with the field school that's in session right now. And when you all arrive in July, we're going to have a lot of these features exposed to excavate. So again, you know, we'll go over a lot of this, but metal detector surveys have been incredibly important for locating these sites across the property. And in the home farm, they've been critical for locating everything, you know, from the blacksmith shop to the overseer's house to the set of slave quarters that we've reconstructed based on the archaeology. But knowing where to put these units was based on these metal detector surveys where we've got, you know, definitions of concentrations of artifacts. So, and when you get to Montpelier, we'll go over a lot of the sites we found. You know, we've got two blacksmith shop, the blacksmith shop that's here. We've got another blacksmith shop that's downslope in this area, which we call the Farrier site. It's a site of a water-powered bellows that we found through archaeology. So a whole set of complex sites that are in this area. But one thing that we're gonna also be talking about when you're here is some of the later history of Montpelier, because this is really incredibly important for the preservation of Montpelier. So for the home farm, and I'm going to close out some of these windows. I got too many windows open here from the maps. In a second, as my computer starts to slow down. All right, almost there. All right, so for the home farm, the area of the home farm that we're looking at, and actually let me give a perspective from the overseer's house right here. The home farm today is basically this open field that was used, you know, after all the buildings that were here were abandoned in the 1840s. They were basically allowed to, you know, to decay in place. And that's why there's such a rich archaeological history across this area. But through the 19th century, you know, when Dolly Madison sold the property in 1844, not only did she sell all, you know, 5,000 acres of Montpelier, she also sold the enslaved community. Over 120 individuals were sold, families were broken up. And after the 1840s, Montpelier never returns to its operation, you know, agriculturally, because there's only about 25 enslaved individuals living at one time at Montpelier from the 1840s into the 1860s. So during the mid 19th century into the 20th century, this is where so many of the woodlots begin to grow up at Montpelier. So if we were able to look at an aerial of Montpelier, say like in 1820, you know, like we were talking about at the beginning of the lecture, a lot of these areas that are woods today were all open fields. So we're estimating of the 2,700 acres we have at Montpelier, there is probably between 400 to 500 acres in woods in the 1820s, and today there's 1,800 acres of woods. So what that means is so much of the site is incredibly well preserved. And one way that we've been able to see this is through what's called LiDAR surveys. And this is a map showing the LiDAR of the property. And anybody know what LiDAR is? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Has anybody heard of LiDAR? Well, LiDAR, basically, what a LiDAR allows you to do is it's flown by an airplane, and it basically allows you to create a high resolution terrain map of the landscape. So for example, here in the woods, like, so for example, you turn off the LiDAR map right here, this is all woods in this area. In the East Woods, what we've got when you zoom in is not only do we have evidence for barns that we've found through metal detector survey. For example, this tobacco barn up on top of this ridge. But we've also found where the tobacco fields are, and in the bottomlands, you can literally see the last set of plow furrows that were cut into the landscape in the 1850s before this area was abandoned. So what there's evidence for on the landscape is just this incredibly well-preserved, plantation landscape that you can discover through the LiDAR mapping. And what we've also got in this landscape is evidence for ancient road traces that run through this area. Like, for example, up on the ridge right here, you've got multiple generations of roads running down through this area right here. Like, this is an ancient road trace coming down here, and we've put in a walking path into this road trace that comes down past what is an early 20th century sheep barn in this area, and also all these erosional gullies. So basically what we've got at Montpelier is, this landscape that, because of the changes of, ownership and management, when you get into the 20th century and that Montpelier was bought by the DuPont family starting in 1901, what the DuPont family, how they use Montpelier is as more of a country estate. And so we've got these early 20th century photographs that show this major farm complex that's built not where the Madison Farm Complex is over in this area, but where the archaeology lab is. So y'all are going to be definitely visiting the archaeology lab, which is downslope from the main house. But all these buildings in here were built by about the 1850s. For example, this house structure right here was the farm manager's house starting in the 1850s. So right after Dolly Madison sells the property, the new farm complex is built in this area. And fortunately, when the DuPonts buy the property in 1901 and radically expand the number of buildings, they continue to build in this area instead of where the Madison era farm complex is. So we've got, this incredible set of rich building history, architectural history in this area, but it's not disturbing all this Madison era history. And when you get into the 20th century farming is very different from early 19th and 18th century farming. So you mean if the farm complex had been built in here, all these sites would have been destroyed. And that's what happens to a lot of these, early 19th, late 18th century farms and plantations in Virginia. But with the DuPonts, they don't need to make money off the land. They've got, the DuPonts of chemical fame. So they're using Montpelier more as a pleasure grounds. And all through the 20th century, when most of these estates are being farmed with tractor plowing and, older woodlots are being cut down, all this remains in place. And some of the sites that, do get built up at Montpelier are, some really amazing sites. For example, in the late 19th century, there's a number of farmsteads that are built by former enslaved at Montpelier. And this includes everything from the Gilmore farm that we're interpreting to the public today, to sites that are not interpreted, but we're looking to interpret them. So one of the sites that we've recently been studying is the Taylor Walker home, which is on the eastern part of the property. And we've found a former staff did excavations at where their original family home site is. But we've been doing oral histories with Black DuPont workers whose ancestral connections go way beyond the 20th century into the 19th century, of understanding, what their family history was at some of these homes. And some of these individuals, like one gentleman, Leroy Johnson, who's pictured here, he's talking with the MDC's oral historian, Becca Davis. Becca has been doing oral histories with some of these Black DuPont worker families. And what she's finding is there's oral histories connecting back to the 19th century. So similar to archaeology, what we're doing, if you don't look at a landmass for archaeology, you're never going to find it. If you don't talk to the local community, you're never going to understand what oral history is preserved. So we're going to be talking a lot about all of this while y'all are here. And what I wanted to give you a taste of today is just some of this history. And for what's fun about July is we've got a mixture between high school students in 2 weeks and then teachers in about 4 weeks. And so this history that you all are going to be experiencing through the archaeology, you're going to be understanding it firsthand in from the if you will, the myopia of an excavation unit, where you're going to be immersed in excavating the units that are out here. And your world for most of the time is going to be a 5x5 unit, but then also you're going to be able to pull back and look at how this excavation unit that's right here ties in with the overseer's house, based on this map, and then how that ties in to the larger plantation complex and the enslaved community of the early 19th century, but then also the community that not only was at Montpelier, but also how all these communities are connected. And one thing we're going to be talking about when you're here at Montpelier is, say in 1820, the enslaved community at Montpelier consisted of about 120 people. But when this community would have been tied to the other plantation communities that are adjacent. So right next to Montpelier, owned by the Madison family, you've got the plantation called Bloomfield, where there are about another 100 enslaved individuals living and working at the same time that Montpelier existed. And so there were ties between these communities. Enslaved people married community members at adjacent plantations. Also, James Madison had about 5 brothers and sisters, and every time one of those sisters would be married, they would receive a wedding gift of enslaved people that would leave the plantation and go, for example, to Barbersville. And so these stories survive within the community, the descendant community. And so when you look at, what makes up the Montpelier descendant community, it isn't one plantation, it's all of these plantations joined together. And one thing that Montpelier and the MDC are doing right now is looking at the Montpelier burial ground. And the Montpelier burial ground is a site of about 4 acres that consists of all kinds, about 250 burials. And I'm trying to find the right one here. We'll go over more of this when you're here, but we've done ground penetrating radar of the burial ground. And what we've found is over 200 burials in this woodlot and in the field across the way. And who's buried at this community are individuals who were enslaved at Montpelier, but the folks buried here would have had connections to the neighboring plantations, such, like Bloomfield and also Barbersville, and even further afield, all the way down at Monticello and Highland. And so, what defines the Montpelier descendant community, which is, emblematic, symbolized by the MDC's logo, is it's Montpelier, but it's this larger set of community connections. And that's why the MDC encapsulates what's called the arc of communities that goes from Fredericksburg around the Southwest Mountain chain all the way down to Richmond. And so when you're here for the week, we're going to be exploring all these ties and how literally the unit you're digging in ties to all these other areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing screens here, And there, stop share, and we'll go ahead and see, if y'all have any questions. And I'm sorry, this has been like an hour-long monologue. Sometimes, when you're in the Zoom call, you're just taking it all in. But one thing we want to do is not do what I did today, is just have a monologue. A lot of what we're going to be engaging in when you're here is conversations about all this. And but wanted to take a minute to see if you all had any questions about, what we've been talking about here, or what to expect during the week, or things that you just hadn't thought about. How does this change what you know about Montpelier and what you thought you'd be doing next week, or in a week, 2 weeks? Is it what you all?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where where we're gonna be excavating and digging to find artifacts, and I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here as well, Everett. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, it's going to be, this is not a passive experience. I mean, one thing I do want you all to expect is, you're going to be learning a lot. And also, when we do the archaeology of doing the archaeology of Montpelier, what, visitors come to Montpelier expecting to see Madison's home, because that's the brick house with the white columns that everybody sees. And what you get from the archaeological perspective is the invisible side of Montpelier, which isn't, it's much more difficult to see, which is the enslaved community. Because basically every single artifact that we've encountered over the past 30 years of archaeology, there's maybe a handful that can be, was last touched by, say, the Madisons. Everything else, from the serving dishes, the nails, the tools, all this was used and lost or disposed of by the enslaved community. And this is why, when we've done the archaeology of the 2,650 acres, what you can't avoid is the history of, the enslaved Americans who lived at Montpelier. And so what this has made is, it's helped develop a really rich history of Montpelier, but it's one where we've really been have reconciled with this history of enslavement, and how history has masked this, made this history disappear. And so one of the things that, people often encounter when they're here at Montpelier is, thinking about issues about race, and where these ideas came from that they've never thought about before. And for a lot of people, it's very emotional. And for many folks, what they've found is they need to take time in learning about this history to really make sure they take care of themselves mentally, because it's a lot to take in. And what we want to do at Montpelier is make sure you have the best experience possible, physically and mentally. So one thing that we'll talk about when you're here is, how to, acculturate yourself to being outside in 90-degree heat and excavating in a unit and not passing out. But then also, if you're taking in history of racism and, where this country has come from, is getting a moment to, when you need to take a moment to be on your own, be by yourself if you need that. So, whatever you need when you're here for the week, we want to be there for you. And if you have a need, don't hesitate to express it. So, and same goes for right now. If you need anything, if you've got any kind of questions about what to bring, definitely drop us an email or call us, and we can answer those questions. But any other thoughts before we sign out today?
Hey Matt, it's Alexis and the Urban Archaeology Corps interns.
Hi, Alexis. So you got everybody there with you?
Yes, we're all together.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, y'all might have signed in a little bit late. I'm not sure, but I'm recording this, Alexis, and I'll send you all the recordings. So.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I had it down for 3:30, so my apologies.
Oh no, okay, yeah. Well, how's the weather down there? What's the smoke like down there?
Well, we did go out into the woods earlier today to go to our enslaved field laborers site. And when we got back up the hill, I did get an alert that said, from at least from the park, that we are no longer to be outside. So we made it in time. We made it
Nice. Yeah,
inside, before the alert. So it's not too visibly bad, but the air quality is not well. So, but I did have a question for you. Could you
Yeah.
go back over what the heat map on the in the GIS correlated to?
Yeah, the heat map, I'll go ahead and share screens again because I'm a very visual person. The heat map on the 20-meter survey, yeah, these colors that are here, Alexis, the green is, like the dark green is 0 to 5 artifacts, and then the red goes up to about 80 artifacts. And so these are based essentially the number of nails that you're finding on this map in a 20-meter by 20-meter grid. And then when you zoom in, and Alexis, I'm going to send everybody these maps for the recording so you all can play with these to your heart's content. And I'll actually send a user's guide for how to use this. When you zoom in on the map, you get to the 10-foot level, and this is the same concentrations, but on a 10-foot grid. So is that answering what you're asking, Alexis, or did you have more?
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Matt. And we're really excited to come and visit. This fits in perfectly with our work and really the themes that we talked about specifically today. So we can't wait.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah. And Alexis, if you all need anything, any other resources, don't hesitate to reach out. You get my emails. So
Yes, thank you.
yeah, it's going to be a fun week. We've got some fun things planned with your all's group, with both groups, but it's really looking forward to it.
Two things. Speaking of groups, who's from what group? Who's high school and who's teacher?
Alexis is working with is heading up a group called Urban Archaeology Corps, and she's bringing students out on the program, which is the high school program, which also includes college students as well. And then that's happening in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, we'll be at actually a week and a half is when that's happening. And then I think, Lauren, you're part of the teachers program.
Yes, I'm a teacher.
Yeah,
Same.
and Ellie as well. Yeah, that's going to be at the end of the week. So what I'll do is I will send 2 different emails. So you get the names and emails of the folks that are going to be in your group.
Okay.
And that way, if you've got questions that are specific, Lauren and Ellie, y'all are going to be working with Dr. Alex Jones, who runs the archaeology in the community. So that's who we partnered with for the teacher program. So
okay. And then I also wanted to apologize for my cat's intrusion.
Oh, that was adorable. Love seeing your kitty. So, I saw you doing all kind of hand gestures before. Now
I was playing with him to try to keep him from jumping
up
on my computer.
Sounds good. So, well, cool. Again, if y'all need anything, don't hesitate to reach out, and looking forward to seeing you all. And for those of y'all that are watching the recording, the same goes out to you all as well. So, all right. Well, thanks to you all. And I'm hoping that, the jet stream or whatever the weather systems are will keep the smoke away from us during the program. So, but even if we do have smoky, we can't be outside. There's so much work to do in the lab, and there's all sorts of lectures we got planned if we can't be outside for part of the week. What we found with the smoke, and y'all probably seen this too, is it gets bad for a day and then it shifts. It pretty rapidly goes back and forth, but I'm gonna knock on wood for that. So yeah. So all right, everybody, we'll look forward to seeing you. Safe travels, and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and for the rest of you in about 4 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.